Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week I'm finishing off the Stoke Prior First School benches. See you in a minute. Right now it's autopsy time for the benches. The first one went out to the school and sat there for a few days for them to have a look at, and they've come up with a couple of things that are effectively design changes, which is not a great problem. The distance of the benches sit on top of the stand like that, and the distance from the wall was being set by that bottom leg so that I've got something to fix it into the floor with. They've decided they want them a bit closer to the wall, which is fine, that's not a problem, so we're taking about 150 millimetres off that leg. Now, having had the benches approved last week, it was a straightforward job then to start and rip all the rest of the timber down to size and get it all fabricated up. It gets a little bit more complicated in that there's quite a few joints that I've now got to start and deal with, which I hadn't really had a lot to worry about on the first one. There's some quite complicated junctions that I've done rather than having it just butting where there's a T-joint, rather than just butting one against another. I've tried to make it so that it houses into the other bench, and that way I can get them to fix together much more securely. So these are the shots I took during the build. Most of it was done down at the Men in Shed's shed because of the amount of room needed, but certainly a lot of the fabrication of uprights and that was done back at the small shed as well. So I'll show you some of those shots and then we can run on with the install itself. The bench that had already been assembled was actually taken to bits again because there were one or two minor changes to make, but then I just basically took the CLS timbers that we'd previously pre-cut and made up a series of the total of, there were actually 6 individual bench pieces, and they were just put together with the 2 slats on the top that I mentioned before, and then I slightly changed the assembly so that we routed the half round section or the quadrant section on the bottom of the panels, and that way the screws didn't interfere with the rounding over. And then I took them back to the shed and started to paint them back in the small shed with a coat of the oak stain that I'd got left over from the benches that we'd done for Chandler Court, the old people's home. And this is a cuprinol, I think, stain that I use, that it goes off in about 10 minutes, so it's very easy to use, just a light oak finish. I had to do some of the larger ones outside. Fortunately the weather was good at the time, so it enabled me to get them done on an afternoon outside, and as I say, it dries that quickly that you don't get any problem with bugs or anything getting into it. But the benches had seemed to have held up reasonably well. The only problem I'd found with cutting the timbers was that they had moved slightly. Once you cut a third off a piece of timber like that, it can slightly bow some of the timbers. But as they were being assembled back into what was effectively a beam almost in section, it tended to sort of self-support itself, and made sure that the actual final benches were fairly level and straight. And of course, once I could screw them down to the floor, that was going to then pull them all into shape anyway. The bench supports were the biggest pain. I'd had to modify the way I'd put them together last time, because I'd used normal screws on instead of the proper Craig screws in the pocket holes, and that had blown out some of the bits of timber. So I'd corrected that by getting the right size screws in the meantime, but there are, I don't know, 6 benches with 4 legs times 8 in each. It starts to build up. And then I took the benches all in the car, some on the roof rack and some inside, dropped them over to the school fortunately it was the school holidays, so it meant I could take a bit of film there without getting a problem with children being in the pictures that I hadn't got any permission to film. So again, fortunately it was a nice day. This is the site where they're going in. I laid them all out first of all, got a rough idea of, make sure they were going okay. A couple of minor modifications in the corners where I hadn't actually tried to put them together, and the feet were slightly touching on the corners, so I had to take those back outside and trim them down a little bit here and there, but there was nothing that was a major problem. I'd got all my tools with me, and you can see on the one there that's upside down there's a slight corner being cut off it. That was really just to make sure that they butted together properly. I'd made some corner pieces up that screwed in underneath and held them both parts of any joint together. That way it meant that the whole thing was fairly rapidly becoming self-supporting, and it didn't really need a great deal of effort to screw it down to the ground, but it just helped with levelling it all and making sure that there was nothing going to get kicked or pushed that would cause strain on them at all. And as I say, just half a dozen screws underneath on each join. Soon got them into place, and the thing fitted well enough. There was probably half an inch or so spare on one side, so I got it slightly small rather than slightly too big, which would have meant I'd have to cut the leg supports down a bit. So I was quite pleased with that, and it probably took me about an hour and a half just to fix them all and screw them all together. There's one missing in this photograph. On this picture you can see at the moment, you can see there's a plain end on the one bench with no leg support. That's because there's a further one going in that will screw into it, and that's the last one going in. There are a couple of, I think they're about 4 or 5 inch screws going in underneath just to hold the two together, because it relies on a single leg support on that join effectively. And then it was a matter of screwing the actual leg units down to the floor. Not a great deal of fixing in the floor, I don't think, because it's like a rubberized material on top of probably 1/2 inch planks or bits of timber, I'm not quite sure, but the sheer volume of fixings that I've put in seemed to do the job. And you can see from this one that the end is very slightly up in the air, and so it did need that nipping down with a screw just to locate it properly. 3 screws in each foot. As I say, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It just needed that pulling down onto a level floor. And then the final thing to do was to actually test that they were solid enough, and a quick walk around on top of them showed that there was nothing, no movement there anyway. So I packed all my tools up at that point, tidied it all up. I kept finding bits and pieces underneath the benches that I'd forgotten, the odd screw and things, but we soon got those sorted, and that's the finished job really. I think the school are delighted with the benches. They work out about £80 for the whole lot, and given that gym benches are £180 per length, and there are about 5 benches there as equivalents, I think we've saved them £1 or 2 anyway. So then I just tidied my tools up, and like any good tradesman, swept the floor on the way out and left it to them. Well, that's another successful job, I hope. The school certainly seemed pleased with the benches, and as a result we've now got a commission for a pallet car for the playground for them, for the children to have some playtime with. So that's another job for us, and that'll be coming up no doubt in a future video, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Take care, bye. Just a quick postscript. It's worth reminding everybody, if you're in the Midlands or access to the Midlands, next weekend, Maker Central at the National Exhibition Centre, there will be a whole host of YouTube people there, and a lot of demonstrators, a lot of people making things, a lot of suppliers. It's a good weekend out if anybody's in the area. I shall be there both days. If anybody's there that sees me around, come and have a word, come and say hello. We'll be there. Hope to see you then. That's Makers Central. That's the 11th and 12th of May. See you then. Bye.